The storm came without warning. A sudden solar flare had triggered a magnetic storm that now engulfed the small exploration vessel, the Wanderer, as it approached the largely unexplored planet Xylos. Inside the ship, warning lights flashed crimson as systems failed one by one. "No, no, no," Lyra shouted, her fingers flying across the control panel, desperately trying to stabilize the rapidly deteriorating situation. The young scientist had been prepared for challenges on this solo research mission, but nothing like this. "Just hold together." The ship shuddered violently, metal groaning under forces it was never designed to withstand. Lyra barely had time to secure herself in the crash harness before the Wanderer plummeted through Xylos's dense atmosphere, a blazing meteor descending toward the lush, mysterious surface below. The impact came with a deafening crash, throwing Lyra against the restraints so hard she momentarily blacked out. When consciousness returned, she found herself surrounded by twisted metal, blinking emergency lights, and the hissing of damaged systems. A thin trickle of blood ran down her forehead, but a quick self-assessment suggested nothing was broken. "Communications," she croaked, her throat dry with fear and the acrid smoke filling the cabin. The main communications array had been the first system to fail, but perhaps the emergency beacon, a weak, stuttering beep from a backup console, offered little reassurance. The signal was transmitting, but barely. In this remote corner of space, it could be weeks or even months before anyone detected it. With effort, Lyra freed herself from the harness and began to assess the situation. The ship's life support was compromised, but the planet's atmosphere readings, while alien, showed it contained sufficient oxygen. She needed to get outside, survey the damage, and determine if repairs were possible. Using a small laser tool, she managed to force open the jammed hatch. Humid, earthy air rushed in, carrying strange but not unpleasant scents of vegetation and soil. Carefully, Lyra climbed out onto the hull of her fallen vessel. The Wanderer had carved a long scar through Xylos's dense jungle before coming to rest in a small clearing. Towering trees with iridescent blue-green leaves stretched upward as far as she could see. The ground was covered in moss-like growth that emitted a faint glow, providing ambient light even as the planet's sun began to set. In the distance, peculiar calls of unknown creatures echoed through the forest. As Lyra cautiously descended to examine the ship's exterior damage, something caught her eye, a flash of movement in the undergrowth. She turned slowly, not wanting to startle whatever local wildlife might be observing her. What she saw made her gasp. Partially hidden behind a luminescent fern was a tiny creature unlike anything in her extensive xenobiology studies. It stood no taller than her hand, with a delicate, humanoid body that seemed to shimmer with a faint golden light. Most striking were its enormous, opalescent eyes that took up nearly half its face, currently wide with what could only be described as absolute terror. Before Lyra could react, the creature emitted a high-pitched sound. Not quite a scream, not quite a word, but unmistakably an expression of dread. Though she couldn't understand the specific sounds, the emotion behind them was crystal clear. It was afraid. Afraid of her. Lyra raised her hand slowly, trying to appear non-threatening. "Hello," she said softly. "I won't hurt you." The tiny being backed away, its wings, gossamer thin membranes that Lyra hadn't noticed at first, fluttering in agitation. It pointed at her with a trembling finger, uttering what sounded like a phrase, repeated in escalating panic. "Nivi Tash Kartak. Nivi Tash Kartak." Though the words meant nothing to Lyra, something in the creature's body language, in the desperation of its voice, conveyed a meaning that hit her like a physical blow. "Please don't eat me." The realization was so unexpected that Lyra almost laughed despite her dire situation. But the creature's fear was too genuine, too heart-wrenching for amusement. Whatever this little being was, it believed Lyra was a predator who saw it as prey. "No, no," she said gently, crouching to appear smaller. "I'm not going to eat you. I promise." But her words meant nothing to the tiny alien. With one final, terrified glance, it let out another piercing cry, before collapsing in apparent fright, its small form slumping against the base of the fern. Lyra froze, uncertain what to do. The creature had fainted from fear of her. The realization was deeply unsettling. She'd always prided herself on her empathy, her ability to connect with and understand other living beings. Now, to be viewed as a monster. She approached carefully, fighting the urge to immediately check on the fallen creature. Instead, she retreated slightly, giving it space while observing from a distance to ensure it was still breathing. The tiny chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow movements. "What happened to you?" Lyra whispered, more to herself than to the unconscious being. "What makes you so afraid of someone like me?" As darkness fell completely, the bioluminescent flora intensified, bathing the clearing in soft, otherworldly light. Lyra decided to make camp near her ship, but at a respectful distance from the small creature. She would need to assess the full extent of her situation in the morning light, but for now, she set up a small force field perimeter for safety and settled down to rest. Her last thought before drifting into an uneasy sleep was of those enormous, terrified eyes and the desperate plea she'd somehow understood. "Please don't eat me." Morning came with a symphony of alien sounds, chittering creatures, rustling vegetation, and a distant sound like wind through pipes. Lyra woke stiff but determined. Her situation was precarious, but not hopeless. The ship's hull was largely intact, though the propulsion system had suffered catastrophic damage. Her first thought was of the tiny being from yesterday. Careful not to make sudden movements, she peered toward the fern where it had collapsed. The spot was empty. A mixture of relief and disappointment washed over her. Relief that the creature had recovered enough to flee. Disappointment that she might never learn more about this fascinating species. Lyra spent the morning salvaging what she could from the ship, creating a more sustainable camp, and beginning repairs on the communications array. Without proper tools and replacement parts, a full repair seemed unlikely, but she might be able to boost the emergency signal. As she worked, she felt it, the sensation of being watched. Pretending not to notice, she continued her task, occasionally catching glimpses of movement from the corner of her eye. The little being had returned, observing her from various hiding spots, keeping a safe distance, but unable to resist its curiosity. "I know you're there," Lyra said softly without looking up. "And I meant what I said yesterday. I won't hurt you." No response came, but she hadn't expected one. When midday arrived, bringing with it sweltering humidity, Lyra paused to eat. She had emergency rations that would last a few weeks, but would need to assess the local resources soon. Removing a food packet from her supply, she deliberately broke off a small piece and placed it on a leaf several meters away from her position, then returned to her meal without looking in that direction. Nothing happened for a long time. Then, just as Lyra was about to resume work, she caught sight of the small creature darting quickly from behind a tree, snatching the morsel and retreating to safety. It sniffed the food cautiously before taking a tiny nibble. Lyra smiled to herself. It was a start. That evening, she left a small container of purified water alongside another food piece. By morning, both were gone. Days passed in this manner, with Lyra working on repairs and survival tasks while gradually building a fragile connection with the shy alien. She began to talk aloud as she worked, not because she expected to be understood, but to accustom the creature to her voice and presence. "I think I'll call you Pip," she said one afternoon, having caught sight of the being making a small, pip-like sound when startled by a falling leaf. "It suits you, I think." Pip seemed to be growing marginally less fearful, venturing closer each day, though still maintaining a safe distance. Lyra noticed that the tiny alien had remarkable dexterity and intelligence, observing how it navigated the complex forest environment and occasionally manipulated small objects with tool-like precision. On the 7th day, disaster struck. Lyra had ventured slightly farther from camp to collect water when she heard an unfamiliar growl. Turning quickly, she found herself faced with a predator, a sleek, six-limbed creature with mottled purple-black skin and rows of gleaming teeth. It crouched, clearly preparing to pounce. With no weapons and too far from the ship's protective perimeter, Lyra backed away slowly, looking for an escape route. The predator advanced, its movements fluid and purposeful. She gripped a sturdy branch, knowing it would provide little defense, but unwilling to die without a fight. Just as the creature tensed for attack, a high-pitched sound cut through the air, so piercing that Lyra winced in pain. The predator reacted far more dramatically, shaking its head violently as though in agony. In that moment of distraction, Lyra swung her makeshift weapon, connecting solidly with the beast's head. It hissed in pain and surprise before retreating into the underbrush. Heart pounding, Lyra spun around seeking the source of the sound that had saved her. There, trembling on a nearby branch, stood Pip. The tiny alien's throat was vibrating, indicating it had produced the ultrasonic cry that disoriented the predator. "You saved me," Lyra whispered awestruck. Pip stared at her with those enormous eyes, no longer filled solely with fear. Something new had entered them. Confusion, perhaps, or the first glimmer of reassessment. Without warning, the alien darted away, disappearing into the forest canopy. That night, when Lyra left food outside her shelter, she placed it closer than ever before. In the morning, not only was the food gone, but beside the empty container lay a small, iridescent leaf unlike any she had seen in the vicinity. She picked it up carefully, examining its unusual pattern and texture. It seemed to be medicinal, a gift, perhaps, or a form of reciprocity. Either way, it represented progress. 2 weeks after the crash, Lyra discovered a small cave near a stream not far from her ship. It offered better protection from Xylos's frequent rain showers and occasional electrical storms. After confirming it was unoccupied and safe, she established a new base there, transferring salvaged equipment and supplies from the damaged vessel. As she worked to make the cave habitable, she noticed Pip watching from increasingly closer vantage points. The tiny alien seemed especially interested in her tools and technology, studying intently as Lyra configured a water filtration system and set up lighting. "Would you like to come inside?" Lyra asked gently one evening as dark clouds gathered. "It's going to rain soon." Pip, of course, didn't respond verbally, but tilted its head in what seemed like consideration. The storm that night was fierce, with lightning that turned the sky violet and thunder that shook the ground. Lyra, warm and dry in her cave dwelling, left the entrance partially open, a silent invitation. Halfway through the night, a particularly violent thunderclap woke her. By the dim light of her emergency lamp, she saw a small, shivering form huddled just inside the cave entrance. Pip had sought shelter after all. Careful not to make any sudden movements, Lyra slowly sat up. "Hello there," she said softly. Pip tensed but didn't flee. Progress indeed. The next morning, Lyra awoke to find the tiny alien examining her handheld translator device with great curiosity. Though designed primarily for known languages, it had a rudimentary pattern recognition system that could theoretically analyze unknown forms of communication given enough input. "That's a translator," Lyra explained, keeping her distance to avoid startling her guest. "It helps me understand languages I don't know." Pip looked up at her, then deliberately made a series of sounds while pointing at itself. Lyra's heart raced with excitement. "Are you telling me your name?" She pointed to herself. "Lyra," she said clearly, then gestured to the alien. The creature repeated its sounds, which the translator captured but couldn't yet interpret. "Pip it is, then, until I learn your real name," Lyra said with a smile. Over the next few days, an extraordinary process unfolded. Pip began spending more time in the cave, gradually venturing deeper inside. The translator, while unable to convert specific words, began identifying emotional patterns in Pip's vocalizations: fear, curiosity, hesitation, and occasionally, something that might have been humor. Lyra made a breakthrough when she thought to draw simple pictures in the soil. Pip immediately understood the concept and began adding to her drawings, creating rudimentary representations of various forest features and creatures. Through these images, Lyra began to piece together fragments of understanding. Pip's species, which she mentally dubbed Sylvans for their forest dwelling, were small in number and deeply connected to Xylos's ecosystem. They lived in hidden communities, specially adapted to avoid the planet's larger predators. But something darker emerged from their pictorial exchanges. Pip repeatedly drew large, bipedal figures descending from the sky, capturing smaller beings that resembled Pip's kind. The emotion accompanying these drawings was unmistakable: dread, anger, grief. "Someone came here before," Lyra murmured, studying the crude but effective drawings. "Someone who hurt your people." Pip's enormous eyes filled with an emotion too complex for the basic translator to identify. One evening, when Lyra developed a mild fever after exposure to an unknown spore, Pip disappeared for several hours. The alien returned with a collection of leaves and fungi, which it prepared by crushing into a paste using Lyra's tools. Through gestures, Pip indicated that Lyra should consume the mixture. Trusting her small friend despite the risk, Lyra complied. By morning, her fever had broken. "Thank you," she said sincerely, reaching out a finger toward Pip in a gesture of gratitude. To her amazement, after a moment's hesitation, Pip extended a tiny hand and touched her fingertip briefly before darting away in apparent embarrassment. The exchange marked a turning point in their relationship. No longer was Pip acting solely from fear or necessity. Something new had formed, the beginnings of true trust. A month into her stay on Xylos, Lyra made an exciting discovery while searching through the least damaged storage compartments of her ship. A small holographic projector, designed for field documentation, had survived the crash intact. That evening, she set up the device in the cave and activated it. A three-dimensional image of Earth's lush rainforests appeared, hovering in the air before them. Pip froze, staring in wonder at the projection. "This is my home world," Lyra explained, though she knew the specific words went untranslated. "Well, not this exact place, but the planet I come from." She cycled through various images, Earth's diverse landscapes, cities, and most importantly, its people. Pip watched with rapt attention as images of human children playing with small animals appeared. Lyra observed Pip's reaction carefully. The alien's body language shifted dramatically when seeing humans interacting gently with creatures smaller than themselves. Pip reached out, tiny fingers passing through the holographic image of a child cradling a kitten, then turned to look at Lyra with an expression of profound revelation. In that moment, something fundamental changed in their relationship. Pip understood that humans, that Lyra, was capable of caring for smaller, more vulnerable beings, not just consuming them as feared. The next morning, Lyra awoke to find Pip sitting much closer to her than ever before, intentionally within arm's reach. The tiny alien was studying her face with those enormous, expressive eyes. When Lyra stirred, Pip didn't dart away as usual, but remained in place. Slowly, deliberately, the little being placed a hand on Lyra's arm in what could only be interpreted as a gesture of trust. Lyra remained perfectly still, understanding the significance of this moment. "Thank you," she whispered, eyes unexpectedly filling with tears. For the first time since the crash, her isolation truly lifted. She might be stranded on an alien world, but she was no longer alone. That afternoon, they attempted a more sophisticated form of communication. Using the translator's basic visual interface, Lyra showed Pip how to create symbols that corresponded to objects around them. Though rudimentary, this system allowed them to establish a shared vocabulary of sorts. Through this improvised language, combined with drawings and gestures, Pip conveyed more of the history that had led to such fear of larger bipedal beings. Generations ago, sky giants had come to Xylos and captured many Sylvans. None of the taken had ever returned. Since then, Pip's people had hidden deep in the forest, passing down warnings about the monsters from the stars who consumed the unwary. "Not all of us are like that," Lyra tried to explain through their limited communication. "Some of us want to learn, to understand, to help." Whether Pip fully comprehended her meaning remained unclear, but the tiny alien's demeanor suggested a willingness to believe that Lyra, at least, was different from the monsters of legend. As days passed, their connection deepened. Pip began showing Lyra the hidden wonders of xylos, bioluminescent fungi that responded to sound, flowers that changed color with the planet's magnetic fluctuations, and tiny aquatic creatures that built elaborate floating colonies in still pools. In return, Lyra shared more of human culture through holographic images and simple explanations. Music especially captivated Pip, who would listen in apparent delight as Lyra played recordings from her personal collection. Their peaceful existence, however, was not destined to last. The disturbance came at dawn, a distant rumble that Lyra initially mistook for thunder. But as the sound persisted and took on a mechanical quality, realization struck with chilling clarity. Another ship was landing on Xylos. Rescue, she wondered aloud, hope flaring briefly. But Pip's reaction extinguished that hope instantly. The tiny alien began trembling violently, emitting soft, terrified sounds while frantically gesturing for Lyra to hide. Using the translator and their rudimentary shared symbols, Lyra managed to understand. The sound was familiar to Pip, reminiscent of the sky giants from the Sylvan's darkest stories. "We need to see who they are," Lyra insisted, packing essential supplies into a small bag. "If they're dangerous, we'll need to know what we're dealing with." Reluctantly, Pip led the way through the forest, using routes hidden from aerial observation. They traveled for hours, following the distant sounds of machinery and voices until they reached the edge of a newly formed clearing. What Lyra saw made her blood run cold. The ship was unlike her research vessel. It was a utilitarian craft bristling with equipment designed for resource extraction and specimen collection. Around it, a dozen humanoid figures moved with practiced efficiency, setting up perimeter defenses and collection stations. They wore environmental suits with corporate logos Lyra didn't recognize, but their purpose was clear from their actions. These were not researchers or explorers. They were exploiters, the kind of independent contractors who operated in unregulated zones, harvesting rare biological materials and capturing exotic specimens without regard for ecological impact or ethical considerations. As they watched from concealment, one of the crew emerged from the ship, dragging a cage containing several forest creatures. The animals thrashed and called out in distress as they were roughly examined, tagged, and transferred to larger containment units. Beside her, Pip was nearly catatonic with fear, small body rigid and eyes glazed. Lyra placed a gentle hand around her friend protectively. "The stories were true," she whispered. "But these aren't my people, Pip. They're criminals. What they're doing is wrong by our standards, too." Over the next 2 days, Lyra and Pip observed the operation from safe distance. The poachers, for that was what they truly were, established a perimeter and began systematic collection of Xylos' flora and fauna. Most disturbing were the traps they set throughout the surrounding forest, some designed to capture, others designed to kill anything that might threaten their operation. "We need to do something," Lyra decided on the third morning, after witnessing a beautiful six-winged creature cruelly ensnared and caged. "We can't stop them directly. They're armed, and there are too many of them. But we might be able to disrupt their operation enough to protect the most vulnerable species." Pip, having overcome the initial paralyzing fear, conveyed agreement. The tiny alien then surprised Lyra by drawing an elaborate map in the soil, showing hidden routes through the forest and marking spots where natural features might be used to advantage. Together, they formulated a plan that leveraged their respective strengths: Lyra's technical knowledge and human understanding, and Pip's intimate familiarity with Xylos' ecosystem. Their first act of sabotage was subtle. Using components salvaged from her ship, Lyra created a small device that emitted the mating call of one of Xylos' more aggressive predators. Pip placed this near the poacher's sensor array, causing false alarms that kept the crew jumpy and distracted. Next, they targeted the collection operation itself. Pip led Lyra to plants that, when properly prepared, released a powerful but harmless irritant. Under cover of darkness, they contaminated the poachers' equipment, causing rashes and respiratory discomfort that further hampered their efficiency. Each night, they freed what creatures they could from the more accessible traps, being careful to avoid leaving evidence of human interference. Their most daring act came when they discovered the poachers had captured several small mammals resembling Pip in size, but lacking the intelligence and luminous qualities of the Sylvans. The creatures were clearly suffering in captivity, and Pip's distress upon seeing them was palpable. "We'll get them out," Lyra promised, though she knew this would involve their greatest risk yet, approaching the main camp itself. They waited for a stormy night when visibility would be poorest. Pip gathered several dozen of the tiny insects that produced the brightest bioluminescence. When crushed and mixed with a particular resin, these created a striking light show that mimicked Xylos's rare electrical phenomena. While Pip orchestrated this diversion on the far side of the camp, drawing the attention and recording equipment of the poachers, Lyra slipped to the containment area. Using her scientific knowledge of locking mechanisms, she managed to release the captive creatures while avoiding the more sophisticated security on the higher-value specimens. The plan worked perfectly until their retreat. As Lyra slipped back into the forest's edge, a perimeter alarm activated, one they hadn't known about. A spotlight swung in her direction, and shouts indicated pursuit. Heart-pounding, Lyra ran deeper into the forest, deliberately leading the hunters away from Pip's position. She had almost reached the predetermined rendezvous point when she found her path blocked by two of the poachers, their expressions visible now that they'd removed their helmets in the humid night air. "Well, what do we have here?" one said, training a light directly into Lyra's eyes. "Another collector?" "This is our claim, lady. I'm a scientist," Lyra replied firmly, trying to project confidence despite her fear. "And what you're doing here is illegal under Interstellar Conservation Treaty." The men laughed. "No treaties out here, scientist. No witnesses either." As they moved to seize her, a piercing sound cut through the night, far more powerful than Pip's previous defensive cry. The poachers recoiled, clutching, their ears in pain. From the trees above, a shower of the bioluminescent insects fell, temporarily blinding the men with their bright bursts of light upon impact. It wasn't just Pip this time. A dozen tiny figures darted through the air, their combined sonic attack creating a debilitating wall of sound. In the confusion, Lyra broke free and ran, guided by a familiar golden glow as Pip led her to safety. They didn't stop until they reached a part of the forest Lyra had never seen before, a grove of ancient trees with trunks wider than her ship. There, hidden among massive roots, she discovered she'd been brought to a sylvan sanctuary. Dozens of Pip's kind watched her with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Through their improvised communication, Pip explained that after seeing Lyra risk herself to save the forest creatures, the tiny alien had sought out others of its kind to help. Not all had agreed. Many still feared the sky giant, but enough had been convinced by Pip's testimony to mount the rescue. "Thank you," Lyra told the assembled Sylvans, bowing her head in respect. That night, a council was held. Though Lyra couldn't understand most of what was said, the emotional tenor was clear. The poachers presented a threat to all of Xylos, not just the Sylvans. A greater response was needed. By morning, a plan had formed. The Sylvans, though small and physically vulnerable, possessed unique abilities and knowledge that, properly coordinated, might drive the invaders from their world. For the next 3 days, an extraordinary campaign of resistance unfolded. The Sylvans manipulated Xylos' ecosystem with remarkable precision, redirecting the paths of normally benign insects to swarm the poachers' camp, triggering mature seed pods that released powerful soporifics near ventilation intakes, and using their sonic abilities to disrupt electronics and communications. Lyra contributed her technical expertise, creating devices that amplified the Sylvans' natural abilities or interfered with the poachers' equipment. More importantly, she helped coordinate the overall strategy, applying her human understanding of the invader psychology. "They're not just after specimens," she explained to Pip and the other Sylvan leaders through their limited communication methods. They want profit without trouble. If we make this place too difficult, too costly to exploit, they'll leave. The campaign culminated in a confrontation at the poacher's ship. While most of the crew was distracted by a spectacular display of bioluminescence that mimicked a dangerous atmospheric phenomenon, Lyra and a team of Sylvans infiltrated the vessel. Using her scientific knowledge, Lyra accessed their navigation system and planted a subtle but effective sabotage, a program that would trigger warning signals suggesting catastrophic environmental degradation that would destroy any collected specimens. Meanwhile, the Sylvans deployed their resin mixtures in key components, ensuring the ship could still leave but would experience alarming but non-dangerous malfunctions. The plan worked better than expected. Within hours, the poachers had accelerated their departure timeline, hastily loading their most valuable finds while abandoning others. 2 days later, amid increasing equipment failures and mysterious toxic conditions that caused discomfort but no permanent harm, they departed entirely. As the exploiter's ship vanished into Xylos's upper atmosphere, a celebration erupted among the Sylvans. For the first time, Lyra heard their laughter, a sound like tiny silver bells that filled the ancient grove with joy. That night, Pip led Lyra deeper into the heart of the Sylvan territory than any outsider had ever been permitted to go. They arrived at a clearing where massive crystal formations emerged from the ground, glowing with an inner light that responded to the Sylvan's presence. Through their communication system, Pip explained that these were the memory crystals, repositories of Sylvan history and knowledge. For generations, they had also served another purpose, sending energy patterns into space, a form of communication the Sylvans believed reached the stars themselves. In a solemn ceremony, Pip approached the largest crystal and placed both hands upon its surface. The crystal brightened noticeably, pulsing with patterns of light that spread to the others until the entire grove was illuminated in a breathtaking display. "What did you do?" Lyra asked when Pip returned to her side. Through gestures and their shared symbols, Pip conveyed a profound message. The crystal now contained the truth about Lyra, about the sky giant who had proven to be a friend, not a monster. This truth would become part of Sylvan history, a new chapter after generations of fear. Lyra was deeply moved by this honor, but sadness also touched her heart. Her emergency beacon had been transmitting for months now. Eventually, someone might find her. What would happen to this newfound trust between species then? Another month passed. Lyra had almost given up hope of rescue when a new sound echoed through Xylos's skies, the distinctive hum of a research vessel's engines. She and Pip watched from their hidden vantage point as a sleek ship bearing the insignia of the Interstellar Scientific Coalition touched down in a clearing not far from her original crash site. Unlike the poacher's vessel, this one moved with precision and care, minimizing environmental disturbance. "These are my people," Lyra explained to Pip, who still trembled slightly, but no longer in blind terror. Scientists, explorers, like me. Through their communication system, she asked the most important question: "Will you come with me when they take me home?" Pip's response was complex, a mixture of desire to remain with the newly reunited Sylvan community and a clear attachment to Lyra. Before a decision could be reached, they needed to assess these newcomers. As the rescue team began their search pattern, using Lyra's beacon signal as a guide, she and Pip observed their methods. These scientists moved with respect through the forest, documenting but not disturbing, clearly following established conservation protocols. When Lyra finally revealed herself to the search team, their joy and relief were evident. Questions poured forth about her survival, the crash, her discoveries. But when she mentioned the Sylvans, skepticism showed on their faces, until Pip cautiously emerged from hiding. The xenobiologist on the team, Dr. Eleanor Chun, was overcome with professional excitement, but controlled her reactions admirably once Lyra explained the Sylvans' history of traumatic contact with outsiders. "An undocumented sentient species," Dr. Chun whispered in awe. and you've established rudimentary communication. This changes everything, Lyra. Using the research vessel's advanced translation technology, communication with Pip and later with other Sylvan representatives improved dramatically. The full story emerged of previous exploiters who had indeed captured Sylvans for private collections or research, of Lyra's crash and the initial terror, of their growing friendship, and finally of their resistance against the poachers. As the research team's linguist worked to develop a more comprehensive translation matrix, Dr. Chun approached Lyra privately. "The Coalition will want to establish a permanent research station here," she said. "With the proper ethical protocols, of course. But given their history, the Sylvans may not welcome such a presence." Lyra considered this carefully. What if the relationship were reciprocal? Not humans studying Sylvans, but both species learning from each other? And with Sylvan representatives having veto power over research activities? The idea was revolutionary, but not without precedent in recent coalition reforms. Dr. Chun agreed to propose it to both her superiors and to the Sylvan Council. Over the next several days, while repairs to Lyra's health and preparations for departure continued, an extraordinary negotiation took place. The Sylvans, led partly by Pip, who had emerged as an unexpected diplomat, expressed both caution and curiosity about expanded contact with humans. The solution, when it emerged, was elegantly simple. Lyra would return to Earth as planned, but as an official liaison for Sylvan interests. Pip, after much consideration and discussion with their community, requested to accompany her, the first Sylvan to voluntarily leave Xylos, a cultural ambassador to the wider universe. Meanwhile, a minimal observation post would be established in orbit around Xylos, with any planetary research requiring explicit Sylvan approval and participation. The location of the Sylvan communities would remain undisclosed in all official records, protected by the highest classification protocols. On the day of departure, a small gathering of Sylvans came to witness Pip's historic journey. The tiny alien, once paralyzed by terror at the sight of Lyra, now stood confidently beside her human friend as they prepared to board the ship. "Are you certain?" Lyra asked one final time, knowing what a monumental step this was. Pip's response, now accurately translated by their new communication device, was both simple and profound. "Once I feared you would eat me. Now I know the universe contains both monsters and friends. I choose to learn which is which beside you." As the ship lifted off, Pip pressed tiny hands against the viewport, watching as Xylos, a world of fear, then home, then battleground, and finally a place of new beginning, receded into the starscape. Their first stop would be an orbital research station where Coalition scientists eagerly awaited the opportunity to learn from both Lyra and Pip about their extraordinary experiences. Beyond that lay Earth, and beyond Earth, a future neither could have imagined when they first encountered each other in terror and misunderstanding. In the quiet of the observation deck, Pip turned to Lyra and spoke words that needed no translation device to convey their meaning. "There is much to learn, and I am no longer afraid, because I have a friend." Lyra smiled at the tiny being who had transformed from terrified victim to trusted ally. "We both have a friend," she replied softly. "And together, we'll make sure what happened on Xylos, both the bad and the good, changes things for the better." As the stars streaked past the viewport, human and Sylvan sat side by side, two beings from worlds apart who had overcome the greatest barrier of all, fear of the unknown, to forge a bond that would open new chapters not just in their own lives, but in the unfolding story of interspecies understanding throughout the galaxy. In Pip's luminous eyes, there was no longer the reflection of a monster, but of a friend. And in that simple truth lay hope for all the diverse children of the stars.